Welcome, listeners, to a new episode of the Academy Anonymous podcast where we're covering the Oscars. The Oscars took place a little while ago, so we're just going to do our annual Post-Mortem episode and go over all the major highlights. I'm your co-host, Joseph.
And I'm Jules, and thank you all for joining us. Before we start, just really quick, make sure to check out our website, framesandflicker.com, and our Twitter at Academy Anon. They're both posted on the cover art. And let's do the post-mortem for the telecast that happened last weekend. I think there's a few things to unpack. You know, I think one of the things that sticks out. Well, first, let's talk about the ceremony itself. Mm-hmm. Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
You know, it's his second year hosting.
Right.
You know, I'm a little bit iffy. I don't think Conan O'Brien is the best host. Like when Jimmy Kimmel came out for that brief moment, it kind of, it made me miss Jimmy Kimmel a little bit, who I thought was a very good host. I think some of the comedy bits worked. I wasn't a big fan of the opening video with weapons and the kids. It kind of definitely revealed, I think, really early on that we were going to be wrong about our best supporting actress when Amy Madigan and Weapons got such a spotlight.
Right.
And Amy Madigan right now is the number one most looked at actor on IMDb. You know, in the ranking, she's true? Number one. Yeah, she is.
Wow.
Yeah, she is.
Wow.
Which is crazy. It's incredible, the story of the journey that film and that performance took throughout award season.
Right.
Just goes to show that, you know, of course, early on things are going to be off, but never sleep on those, really bright spots that start to happen around mid-year, even maybe possibly even early in the year.
Right.
They can have legs if they've got the fans.
Right. And also depending on the competition too, right?
That's true. Yes, absolutely.
And we'll talk about supporting actors, but I agree with you. I think that Conan was not the best choice, but let's be honest, this is a thankless job. There's always a bunch of criticism and critiques on whoever hosts the ceremony. One could argue that no one has ever done a good job. They've just done a good enough job. I mean, I remember those years that Jimmy Kimmel was a host. They were fine. I didn't think they were anything particularly special, but I do think it was a special moment this year when Jimmy Kimmel did come out. And if any year would sort of beg for the presence of Jimmy Kimmel, it would be,
I agree.
I would assume this year. That being said, maybe that was something that they specifically wanted to avoid, and I'm sure they have their reasons. After all, there was a whole, Disney Jimmy Kimmel thing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree. It was an okay ceremony.
Still, gripes about how they cut off speeches.
Yes.
I'm still pretty disappointed that they didn't find room to include all the original songs.
That's really dumb.
They only included the mega hit Golden and, of course, Sinners.
Right.
And the Sinners sort of, reenactment of that very important, significant scene in the film.
Right.
I thought that came out nice. But it just sucks. I think it's very low class. I think it's very, just poor taste.
I also think it's a decision that sort of begs for the category's sort of own extinction, if that makes sense. I've never been a big proponent for this category, but if you as an awards body and as an organization and as a cultural event are going to defend the importance of this category, then you should back it up by inviting everyone to perform. And that if you don't find a way to make that marketable to your audience, that's really your problem. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like you can't be both. You can't say that this category is really important for it to exist and then not invite the other three songs to perform. I think that was really distasteful, and I completely agree with you. And I think they should completely amend that.
Right. And I think this year we were talking about it, the show was lightning speed.
Oh yeah.
I felt like the show went really fast. I still have very fond memories of being a very small kid because we've been doing this a very long time, even if Academy Anonymous isn't that old just yet.
Right.
We have been watching the Oscars since we were itty bitty little things. And I remember those evenings feeling very long with our family, watching the ceremony, not really being sure what was going on. I think one of the first ceremonies that we watched was for Titanic. Because that was a big movie in our childhood, and I think in a lot of people's childhood.
Right.
But this year's ceremony zipped past.
It did
so quick. Maybe it was again that they started at 7. Is that, I don't know if that's a new thing.
I think part of it was that, and I think it was a successful
7
move.
Eastern time.
Yeah, 7 Eastern time. I think that's a successful move, and I think they should continue to do that. In my opinion, that's how I feel about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are other formatting choices that helped, like, for example, and I think they've done it a few years, but like the whole, a pair of presenters get a couple of categories.
Yeah.
Instead of every category gets a new presenter. I think that's been a very successful choice.
Yeah. I wasn't the biggest fan of certain, who they got to present certain categories. I just think it was a bit of a mismatch sometimes. I miss a little bit of the gender reversal in the acting categories too.
Yeah.
I didn't mind it, but I liked it more the way that it usually goes.
What do you think was behind that decision?
I don't know.
It was an odd choice, I think.
Yeah.
I definitely love, and I'm always a big fan of starting with supporting actress, starting with a very big meaty category.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always fun. I do think some of the presenters, like, I don't think that it's kind of weird to see Zendaya and Robert Pattinson present Best Director.
Right.
Obviously, A24,
that feels very driven by A24.
A24 positioned them really well, even though A24 could not have had a worse night. That being said,
true.
like, I also think, as much as I love each actor, and I think one actor has just such a storied career. You have the Bill Pullman and Louis Pullman.
Yeah,
I didn't see the point of doing that.
I agree 100%.
I didn't think the bit really worked.
It didn't
too much.
work too well,
and so sometimes they had these awkward things. Okay, so the Bridesmaids reunion was good.
I have liked the idea that they've I think they've done it for the last couple of years of emphasizing reunions. I have liked that. But I did think it was kind of an odd choice to have the Moulin Rouge reunion be the Best Picture.
What was that?
I mean, I love Moulin Rouge just as much as everybody, but it's kind of weird for Best Picture.
To me, it's a couple of things. Number one, it's, again, this is airing on ABC, owned by Disney, owner of 100%. 20th Century Fox. That was a 20th Century Fox Best Picture nominee.
100%.
But I refuse to believe that I am so old as to have the presenters be these legacy presenters, individuals who are involved with these big important movies, and it's Moulin Rouge. I'm used to seeing and the Star Wars New Hope team is coming out. You know what I mean? And for it to be Moulin Rouge, it just makes me feel incredibly old, right? So yeah, and again, Moulin Rouge.
Yeah,
they didn't give the Oscar to Moulin Rouge.
Right.
And Moulin Rouge, I think, maybe came out third that year.
Yeah,
behind Lord of the Rings, behind A Beautiful Mind. So it was an odd.
Yeah,
it was an
choice.
odd choice. It was a very odd choice. And the bit was kind of awkward too.
Yeah, but in general, I like the reunion idea. I do like everyone likes seeing films that they're fond of and the cast reuniting. Let's talk about, I think, a very important moment that people have talked about, which is the In Memoriam.
Yes.
Which I feel took a different path this year by spotlighting specific filmmakers and having people who've worked with those filmmakers, actors who've worked with those filmmakers, just have more of a space, a moment to speak on their legacy and their work. And I liked that. I thought that felt appropriate, especially for the amount of storied careers and filmmakers that we lost this year.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's always gripes about who's left off of the In Memoriam, so that's always a controversy.
Right.
But in general, taking a moment to spotlight, Robert Redford and Rob Reiner and Catherine O'Hara and Diane Keaton, I thought that was appropriate. What do you think?
I think it was appropriate, but I think they always run into the issue where, undoubtedly, some people feel, snubbed or some looked over. Overlooked. Could you have someone there recognizing the immense contribution that Frederick Wiseman has done to nonfiction filmmaking? Yes. Absolutely. Are you going to be able to sell, advertising that way? No, you're not.
Right. Robert Duvall.
I mean, how can you not have something for Robert Duvall? Yeah. That's just kind of crazy. I mean,
yeah.
Robert Duvall, Robert Redford, they're shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I think you pointed out something that I thought was interesting. And we can keep talking about it. But one thing that I did want to say was omissions. So people did have commentary about the omission, for example, of James Van Der Beek and the late Eric Dane. which is interesting because it's certainly been, at the forefront of pop culture, certainly because they are, such early deaths in these individuals, in these creative artists' lives, and hugely impacting for people who grew up with their work. You had mentioned something interesting, which is the idea that, I don't know if the Academy responded this way, but they were not officially Academy members.
I read somewhere from a tweet or something that they possibly weren't mentioned because they weren't Academy members, possibly.
And I want to just broach that idea because the Academy has a real problem in their hands, in my opinion, because you have these, these deaths that are going to happen, from people who are involved in the industry, and they have to have a clear policy. Because if you're going to sell your audience and you're going to sell your viewers and culture, people who observe the culture, and you're going to tell them that Eric Dane and James Van Der Beek are missing because they were not Academy members, then what are you going to do when Ryan Coogler passes, who has also rejected Academy membership? What are you going to do when Terrence Malick passes and he has rejected Academy membership?
So
what's your policy going to be?
Maybe the bridge is that, they're Academy Award nominees and winners. And it's in Ryan Coogler's case. So that kind of makes up for that.
So what's going to happen to Terrence Malick? Because Terrence Malick has never won an Academy Award.
But he's an Academy Award nominee.
So I guess maybe then that should be the cutoff, that you're either an Academy Award nominee or an Academy Award member or a winner. I just feel like, why don't you get ahead of it and tell viewers that and announce it, and then the expectation will be different. And we can have a discussion on whether that's the appropriate policy. I remember like one year they left off, I believe, Brad Renfro, another young man who passed away. So to me, we can only have an official discussion if you're giving us what the correct parameters are, so that we can, build our expectations around that.
Right. Two things about the In Memoriam before we move on to the next topic is two things that I wasn't crazy about, even if generally just in general, I like the space that they made, to highlight these careers and these filmmakers. The Rob Reiner segment, I thought it was a little bit strange to have all these actors come out. Okay, that was nice. Actors that represent some of his greatest achievements in filmmaking, but they just kind of stood there.
Right. It could have been more interactive, more of an active presentation.
To me, like it missed a little bit of that potency that I think they were aiming for, having these actors come out and just stand there. It kind of felt almost like self-congratulatory in a way. Are we clapping because these are great actors and they were in great movies? Or are we celebrating Rob Reiner and his work? I feel like the bridge wasn't concrete enough for me.
Right.
And then Barbra Streisand doing the homage to Robert Redford. I'm sure they were very close. Obviously, they seem to have had a very close relationship. But, I did feel that it was a little bit too sentimental. It was a little bit schmaltzy. And I was very interested that, over the week we learned that Jane Fonda had some thoughts about that.
Wow.
And I would have liked to have seen Jane Fonda give, an homage to Robert Redford. I think that would have been nice. I wasn't crazy about the actual execution of the Barbra Streisand, Robert Redford bit.
Moment. Okay, I get that. And I see where you're coming from. I think it's kind of weird to have all these actors gather for Rob Reiner, because you could have that for so many of the people that you gave an actual minute to maybe expand a little bit more on their loss. Robert Redford, Diane Keaton. You could have done that as well. I think maybe the only thing I can think of is that the death of Rob Reiner and his wife and partner was so impactful to anyone who observes the industry that they wanted to give it a very special moment, a very significant moment. That's the only thing I can think of. I still think it would have been more dynamic to have had more of those actors voice a few of their feelings, a few of their experiences with him.
Exactly.
So I do think you're sort of missing the boat there. And I do think that Barbra Streisand moment can be a little bit sentimental. It's always nice to see Barbra Streisand, and I do think it's an appropriate person to invite. Would I have loved a dual presentation between her and Jane Fonda? I think that would have been epic. At the same time, to me, it's even more fascinating in the sense that Jane Fonda is not there, and Jane Fonda is wearing sort of, I think, a pin to the after party or something, talking about no merger. And so why does it feel to me a little bit like we shouldn't invite Jane Fonda because she may be a little bit more vocal about things that we would rather avoid at this moment. And you don't want to have her wearing that pin.
That's a very good point.
When David Zaslav's in the audience.
That's a really good point.
So I think that's part of it. And I think that
could have been politically motivated a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a little bit distasteful.
Yeah.
But the intentions are always good with In Memoriam. The problem, I think, in my opinion, is that the expectations are so high. And the moment, I think, has come for the Academy to really address how they're going to handle it from here on out. And I think there are plenty of really good opportunities for them to exploit, and we'll see if that happens. But yeah, sort of a mixed bag, like always.
What about speeches? I feel like, it was a bummer that Sean Penn didn't show up.
Yes.
He's doing humanitarian work in Ukraine. But still, it would have been nice. I know he's been very critical of the Oscars as of late over the last few years, in part because of how he feels they've dealt with the Ukraine issue, conflict. And so, but, it's kind of a bummer because it's his third Oscar, and who knows if he gets another Oscar after this.
Unlikely,
in
my opinion.
Right, especially now after having skipped. Or, honestly, the fact that the fact that Sean Penn was able to win the category and not having shown up at the BAFTA, not having shown up at the SAG, winning both of those. There was a lot of interviews won battles, dominance on the award circuit. But, very silent after that, after it got the nominations and whatnot. And he was still able to win. I think goes to show that despite how critical he might be of the Academy and the Oscars, he's a very respected.
He commands a lot of respect.
And admired actor, to those who are actually voting.
What I think is sort of interesting about that moment for supporting actor, and I don't know if you want to start digging into categories or highlights, but I think it's an interesting moment that you pointed out. The Kieran Culkin sort of delivery at the end, I kind of admire that. The sort of like, I could say that I'm going to accept it on his behalf, or I can just sort of say, yeah, he doesn't really want to be here. And I kind of admire that upfrontness, the same way that I'm not beyond admiration for Sean Penn's, talking down at the Academy and then not showing up.
Yeah, putting your money where you're.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that.
I kind of like the consistency of I don't agree with a lot of what they do, and I disagree with a lot of things that they've done, and so I'm just not going to show up. And so I do.
Except he didn't show up at the SAG or the BAFTA either.
And maybe he feels the same way. Maybe he feels the same way. I remember a few years ago when Joe Pesci didn't show up to anything, but he did show up to the Oscars.
Did he?
I think he did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And we're talking about Irishman, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did. I will say, in my opinion, it was also one of the more contentious moments when you have the camera on the other nominees, which is great. They should never get rid of it.
Never.
But they were a lot of, in my opinion, bummed.
I think there was only
faces.
one.
I think
in supporting actor, the one bummed face was like,
I disagree.
This guy didn't even show up here.
I think
Delroy Lindo.
Delroy was upset that Sean didn't even show up, and he's been working for so long, and he's finally been nominated. He didn't get the win. I don't think Stellan was very excited about it. I think Benicio was happy.
Right.
And I don't think Jacob was surprised, but that was sort of a funny moment.
Right. I thought it was nice to see later on in the week that they gave him a mock Oscar, made out of materials that were destroyed by the Russians.
Yeah.
That was nice.
It was sweet.
It's a very brief video, but in the video, it seems like he's touched.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the achievement is lost on him. I just think he has different priorities.
Right.
Which I, again, as we just said, I kind of respect a little bit, to be honest.
Right.
But what a surprise that was, in terms of not that he won the Oscar, but that he would go on to win the Oscar.
Yes.
Because actually when the year started, he seemed like a perfect candidate to win, just considering that, it was assumed that he was going to be the villain, the antagonist. Right. But then the movie comes out and, they love everybody from the cast. People have different favorites. And then Stellan Skarsgård was such an early favorite from Cannes and just seemed to fit the bill of what would win that category. Right. Then Benicio ends up, winning most of the regional critics groups. And then it just ends up being Sean Penn again. So,
and
so it was this full circle moment.
At one point there was a debate, is Lockjaw just too unlikable? I think it was obviously an interesting moment because you have Sean Penn joining the big three group. Mm-hmm. And so he joins Daniel Day-Lewis. I think his Win mirrors a little bit more closely someone like Jack Nicholson with 2 leads and 1 supporting. I think that inevitably helped that he had never won a supporting Oscar.
I agree.
But he does join the 3 club, and very few people have it all in lead. I think Daniel and Francis, maybe Katharine Hepburn, who has a leading 4. But yeah, that was interesting. I wonder what other highlights there were for you in the night, and I think despite our critiques on the actual presentation, it was a pretty historic night, right? So is there another moment that you really loved in terms of a highlight of the entire thing?
Well, speaking about, history, Sinners winning cinematography, that was a big historical moment.
That was great. That was great. And
one of the surprises of the night, because even though Sinners was an early favorite, One Battle had gotten a lot of steam with the BAFTA win and with the ASC win, and it seemed like it was One Battle's for the taking, and then all of a sudden Sinners wins.
And you have to go back a little while to see the last time that a winner from BAFTA and the Cinematographers Guild, the ASC, didn't end up winning. And I think by and large, the community that predicts who's going to win had sided with Michael Bauman. Nonetheless, it was great to see Autumn win. I think she had a terrific speech, asked all the women in the audience to stand up. Her son was there. I believe Ryan, helped bring her son to her seat so that he could get a better view of seeing Autumn win. That was a spectacular moment. And certainly a highlight.
Very, such a significant moment for the history of the Academy Awards and of cinema. But a surprise. I didn't expect, because initially I was surprised that Sinners was getting passed up for towards the end, One Battle after another in these bigger awards bodies, but also in a lot of the regional presentations or organizations were giving it to Train Dreams. So it just felt like the passion wasn't there behind Sinners. And then we had heard that people were a little bit critical with some of the visual work in Sinners, and that maybe that was one reason why it wasn't winning more things. I think it came down to in the category, maybe they just felt that Sinners was the showiest, and usually the showiest wins in this category.
You're absolutely right.
Even though One Battle might have been my personal pick, I think it was yours as well. Sinners is just on a conceptual level the showiest one.
And I think also it's not just the showiest one. I think sometimes it's also like the most, for lack of a better word, commercial. And so I remember when something like Inception wins over True Grit, despite them both being very big commercial successes, I think a lot of it is just the idea that, Inception was the blockbuster of them. And so between One Battle and Sinners, yes, One Battle has VistaVision and you could market that. Just the idea that Sinners was the blockbuster of the two, I think gives it a little bit of the edge, or gave it a little bit of the edge. But I also think history was a part of it. And I think you couldn't ask for a more deserving winner. And I think that was a great moment. So I think now maybe the lens turns to BAFTA, which has not broken that history, because the Guild has already awarded, for example, Mandy Walker for her work in Elvis. Now the Oscars have awarded Autumn for her work on Sinners. So it turns to the Guild as to when the Guild is going to have that moment. And I will observe that with interest. But in terms of, history making moments, we should really talk about casting, which was a great moment.
It was actually a great moment, full stop. I love the presentation of having actors come out, the 5 of them. I kind of miss that a little bit. I know it's a little showy. It's a little kind of,
and too long. It's too long. You can't do that.
I know,
for every
but I do
category.
like it. I do like, having, past winners come out and,
one per nominee.
Yeah.
You got 5 people there.
Yeah,
and
I do.
The
like.
mic,
I have to say, I do. I have to say, I do like it. But I really liked it here in casting. I thought it was very appropriate.
Yes, I agree. So you had Gwyneth Paltrow in there for Marty Supreme. You had Chase Infinity, One Battle After Another.
Wagner
for Secret Agent.
Hamnet.
Paul
Mescal,
who was snubbed. So you had a lot of the snubbed people come out.
Delroy.
You had a lot of snubbed people who did not get nominations come out and shout out their casting.
Well, there's only one person on that stage who doesn't have a nomination, and that's Chase.
You're right. Well, you're right. Which again, she should have been there. But most of them were not nominees that year. So I'm saying they didn't invite Jesse Buckley to talk about Hamlet, nor did they invite Timothée Chalamet to talk about Marty Supreme, but instead I liked the idea that they were spotlighting some of those people who were not going to have the camera in front of them because they were not nominees, with the exception of Delroy Lindo, which in reality, in my opinion, again, Delroy Lindo is just such an elegant speaker, so I understand why you want him up there to deliver that moment for their casting director. I think it would have been great to see Miles there personally.
He had a moment. He had a moment.
He did, and I was so happy about that. Right. But you're right. I love the presentation of it. It was super appropriate. It was history making because it was the first time it ever happened. But it was also, in our opinion, right, a history making moment, because I think that's when the night shifted. I think we came in to the Oscars saying this really feels neck and neck. Is it going to be more wins for Sinners, but the biggest win for One Battle? The most wins for One Battle, but the biggest win for Sinners? Are they going to end up tying or something like that? And then I think this is the moment where it became clear, okay, we know what kind of night it's going to be.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite awards also, because I thought that the film that deserved to win the most won. I was very happy we got it wrong, as did most people.
Most people were predicting.
Everybody got it wrong.
Most people were predicting a win for Sinners, and it was certainly a favorite for the majority of the Oscar race this year.
Right. But I was so happy to see that One Battle won that. I did think it was the best in the category. It would have been my personal choice as well. And I'm not surprised that it won. And I almost wish I had maybe, I don't know. It was very tough. It was a tough call.
No way. There's no way. I mean, it would have been a really, my hats off to anyone who was able to get that right, even though it was obviously a formidable contender there. Just, I think most people really felt that it would end up going to Sinners.
Yeah, it just in my impression. And again, Sinners has a terrific cast, and that's such an integral ingredient element of the film that lends to its success. But in my opinion, there's just not one part wasted in One Battle. Even the smallest part, 2 lines, feels, deliberate and thoughtful as to the casting choices. And so I was a really big fan of that win. That was a highlight for me.
I'm so excited to see how this category evolves over time. I think
because I do think people were disappointed overall with the nominations, like the nominees for the category that were a little bit predictable, familiar. That
Secret Agent was
minus the Secret Agent, which was great, a great inclusion. But in general, it was the same movies that we were seeing in other categories, and this was an opportunity to highlight, movies like The Secret Agent that you wouldn't expect to be in there, but that absolutely deserve to be on there.
But it's kind of fun, I think, also because going forward, we'll have sort of like a new chess piece on the table, because what we learned was all 4 acting nominees came from this category. All 4 acting winners came from this category, right?
No, weapons.
Oh, excuse me, weapons. You're right.
Minus weapons.
Minus weapons. 3 of the winners came from this category. Thank you for calling me out on that. The other thing I think that's interesting is the winner here was the film with the most acting nominations, right? One Battle ended up winning this, and it had 1 more nomination over Sinners. Could that have,
That's true.
Maybe illuminated why it would break towards One Battle? Obviously not.
Even though I want to say, and I'll just bring this up really quick, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but thinking back on even when the nominations came out, you and I discussed this, and I don't know if we mentioned it in the episode that was discussing the nominations, but they resisted giving any film more than 4 acting nominations, and they had the opportunity to do so with One Battle, especially after especially after those SAG nominations. And so it almost feels like this Academy is very hesitant. The voting body as a whole, at least those who pick the nominees, they're very hesitant to break that, threshold of more than 4.
Right.
Which wasn't the case in the 70s.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's something to be aware of. Why it breaks towards One Battle, I wonder if it's a little bit not unrelated to what we're saying about cinematography and it breaking for the big blockbuster Sinners. Maybe here, I think maybe it hurts that Sinners is the bigger blockbuster, and they instead wanted to give it to a film that was a little bit more of a glorified, big budgeted independent film, so to speak. And then the other factor I think that we can talk about is just the idea that, you had such esteemed names in this category, including Nina Gold and Francine Maisler. But maybe something that helped this break for One Battle After Another in terms of sort of the industry vote here, and the people voting are very much people involved in the industry, is just the idea that the relationship between Paul Thomas Anderson and Cassandra is they've had a longer tenure together. And maybe that's was part of the reason why One Battle ended up getting the edge here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
But yeah, really strong historic moment. I like the way it was presented. It was a really meaningful moment in the night. So that was a highlight for me. We have to talk about another history-making moment, which was the category of best live action short film, which they could not have gotten a better presenter for, in my opinion, than Kumail Nanjiani. So what did you think?
I thought Kumail did a really good job, under the pressure of having to deliver a tie. I thought what he said about the irony of that, having that tie happen in a short film.
Absolutely brilliant.
Right. I was happy to see the tie because we didn't get it wrong, because we predicted the singers. We did. It was unfortunate, though, that most people were predicting Per Girl Derby, Two People Exchanging Saliva.
Yeah.
So we couldn't get that extra point.
We thought that, man, maybe this is where we can make up a few points.
And I felt really happy for us that we kind of understood after seeing all of the short films that, the singers really was being slept on.
Made a lot of sense.
For a win here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have, maybe I'm mistaken here, but I wouldn't have guessed that Two People Exchanging Saliva would end up winning. So, and it ended up being, the day right before, the day of even Gold Derby, it became the favorite to win. Right.
And so when they said tie,
I was hoping that it wasn't Two People.
Okay, but who did you think it was? Obviously you hoped one was the singers, and who did you think the other one?
I thought the other one was the number one Gold Derby pick, yeah.
Which was?
Two People Exchanging Saliva.
I thought there was a chance that it could have been A Friend of Dorothy. I was really happy that they said the singers, and so I was really excited about that. There was a lot of reasons why we went with it, but I'm glad it turned out well. I just love the idea, and we talked about it, that this historic moment, I think there's been 7 ties, is what I've read, I think, at the Oscars. Yeah. The most recent one being another really interesting moment in the night in 2012.
Yeah, Zero Dark 30.
Yeah, when Zero Dark 30 was able to pull out or sneak out one win for sound editing, tying with Skyfall, which again was really lauded film that year. Was only able to it got songs, so it was able to sneak out that win as well. So that was a really interesting moment. I remember Mark Wahlberg, I believe, delivering that in 2012 for films in 2012 and March of 2013. But that's the last time we had a tie, which actually isn't that far. What is that, like 12 years? No, 14 years.
Yeah.
Been 14 years. So it's excellent to see. We talked about it. I love the idea that of all the categories to tie, it was live action short film. Because to me, that just reads that a lot of voters participated in the category, and there was a lot of passion for those particular films. I think it's interesting in the sense that you and I went through debating all year, is there enough room in this category for these films that mirror each other's energies in good ways? Again, we want to say that live action short film this year was one of the strongest categories ever for live action short film. And so we had a debate all year whether there is enough room to recognize Jane Austen's period drama and A Friend of Dorothy. And there was. We had a debate. Is there enough room to nominate these really idiosyncratic works like The Singers and Two People Exchanging Saliva?
Yeah, because we had seen a lot of these short films at other festivals ahead of time.
Exactly.
And we were already thinking, this would be a good short to be nominated, but can we see both this and that, or both this and that?
Or do they cancel each other out and none of them get in? And so this was a really interesting year for live action short film, really strong year. We thought maybe Butcher Stain is the one that's the one that stands out the most. So maybe there's an edge there. We're glad we got it right, but I think we're even happier to see this be the particular category that produced a tie. And the last thing I want to say,
well, I do think that it helped that Two People Exchanging Saliva was able to bring on board Isabelle Huppert and Julianne Moore.
Right, but every single one had their advantage, right? So Jane Austen's period drama had the whole idea of it's playing off not just Jane Austen, the Jane Austen world in the literary sense, but the Jane Austen world in the cinematic sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jane Austen world has been visited and films nominated at the Academy for so long that was an advantage. You had Miriam in A Friend with Dorothy. You had Isabelle Huppert in Two People Who Changed the Life, Barry Jenkins. But then the singers, they use popular music to their advantage, right?
Yeah.
And Butcher Stain had I believe the son of Barry Levinson. Barry Levinson so helped him make the film, supported him making the film, and so everyone had their advantage. It was really interesting. The last thing I want to say about this category, and I hope it bridges us to the following topic, which is the winners from Two People Exchanging Saliva get on stage.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we got to talk about it. You know, they call out the ballet opera. What are we calling it? Ballet opera gate? What are we calling it?
Well, before we go there for a second, let's just mention that, you know, in terms of the shorts, they're usually the categories that can really affect your pool, how many you get right, both in who you predict as nominees and who you predict as winners. You can always expect a surprise, more than one surprise in either case. And in this case, you know, documentary short was easily the favorite, but animated short was not the favorite.
Right. And we were sort of able to, at the last minute break, that was one of our last minute decisions at the 12th hour.
Most people were predicting Papillon,
and we ended up going with the filmmakers from The Girl Who Cried Pearls. It's a great win for the National Film Board and Canada, who have won in this category before, but it's been quite a while.
Yeah.
So it was really great to see. We definitely thought that, for example, something like stop motion was going to get an advantage, and so we were really happy to see that.
We were really happy with that win. We were pretty ecstatic. We thought like that win was going to help take us over the top.
Right. And we had some misses, including on 12th hour predictions. Maybe we'll talk about it. But it was certainly a moment where we were happy because it went against what the majority of pundits were saying, not unlike last year when In the Shadow of the Cypress won.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting.
Right. But back to your point of, you know, when the filmmakers behind Two People Exchanging Saliva get on stage right in front of Timothée Chalamet.
Front row.
They mentioned the ballet.
And opera gate.
Right.
What are we calling it? Whatever.
I don't know what you want to call it. You know, that has been
a PR nightmare.
You know, that has been kind of, you know, with the days leading up to the Academy, obviously, you know, we've all been privy to just how many people have participated in their, you know, discussion of what Timothée Chalamet said in that town hall with Matthew McConaughey about ballet and opera.
Nathan Lane wondering why the hell we're having a town hall between these two people anyway.
Right. And
Steven Spielberg over
Julie
at
Binoche
South by
mentioned
Southwest.
something.
Julie Binoche saying.
Whoopi Goldberg gave him a, you know, was pretty hard on him on The View.
Hard on him. Yeah.
So I just feel like people, and Conan O'Brien made a few jokes about it as well at the top of the telecast.
I thought he could have been a little bit more pointed,
right.
But he, I think, wanted to not make it too much of his focus. Well, he could have.
I heard, and again, I wasn't in the room, and I don't know that I trust these sources I was hearing, but I heard that at one point Timothée Chalamet and Kylie Jenner were not appreciative of all that kind of, you know, joking around, and that they left for an hour. The actual auditorium, you know, actual theater.
No.
That maybe they went to the lobby or something. I don't know. But supposedly they left for like an hour, and then they came back like right before Best Actor.
Wow.
You know, supposedly. You know, I kind of want to go through the telecast and like keep my eyes, see if the
look
little
for the seat filler.
is there a seat filler on Timothée Chalamet?
Wow.
I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if I buy it or not. You know,
if you're listening to this podcast and you have access to the taping, go and check out when you see a seat filler there.
Right. But I do think that if that were to have happened, I understand because they were joking about it quite a bit.
Right.
I'm still confused why Timothée Chalamet hasn't said anything about it.
We've had this discussion.
Right. He strikes me as the kind of person that would just, you know, grab a hold and control the narrative, the situation, and just speak openly. Listen, you know, I said something that I maybe shouldn't have said. You know, my bad. Let's move on. You know, and I think that would have been enough. But for some reason, he hasn't said anything.
Or he's been advised not to say anything.
Right. Or he's been advised. And I don't know, you know, we've been, you know, Timothée has been on our radar for a very long time. We remember him from Men, Women, and Children when he had a small bit there, and obviously Interstellar. And, seeing him evolve throughout his career, I just wondered if, something wasn't off about him in that final ceremony at the Oscars. He felt a little bit.
We should talk about that. It didn't seem to me like he was his jovial self.
Yeah.
It seemed
it's
to
not
me
what I'm used to seeing from him.
It seemed to me like the talk had gotten to him, and the coverage had gotten to him, and that I think. And again, this is no personal dig. I'm just observing, as I'm an observer here. We're observers, and we cover the race, and we cover, the politics behind it and everything. And so I think one thing is to eventually lose a bid that maybe you felt you were well positioned, or people had claimed you were well positioned to win all year.
Or you felt you deserved it.
Or maybe you felt that you deserved it. And one thing is to lose that, right? Another thing is to lose that in a way where you're being possibly hyper scrutinized.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough thing for anyone.
Yeah.
And this is still a very young actor.
Yeah.
And so I completely understand why it maybe has, he hasn't been able to, just shrug it off with ease.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading a headline. Again, I didn't read the article, but I read the headline. I think it was Variety. One of the major traits talk about, has Timothée Chalamet lost his shine or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and there was one that just came out right now in the last week or so about Timothée Chalamet's downfall and what it reveals about us. It's just
those can't be easy things to hear.
Not at all.
And you're an artist and you're a professional, and so you're still working. But let's face it, it's a very small world. So I'm sure someone has. It's already come across your eyes. You're aware of it.
Of course.
And even if you try not to entertain it, that's not an easy thing to be presented. And
of course.
I want to say that there are people criticizing his behavior quite publicly, or his comments quite publicly, like Whoopi Goldberg. But I also want to say it's not an easy position to be in. He's been scrutinized for the way he's campaigned the movie. I certainly have had my critiques about it, not so much as it reflects on him as an artist, him as a personality, him as a persona, or him as an individual, or a performer, or a professional. Again, film massively successful, the most money-making film in A24 history. So there you go. But I've always critiqued it as strategy.
Right.
In terms of strategy, I said this, back in October or whenever they started presenting it before NYFF, I think, it's the kind of thing that could quickly blow up in your face. And I think it did blow up in his face, or it blew up in the face of the campaign for A24 to a certain degree.
The campaign, not the box office.
Right, exactly. You had to decide what victory is here. And if victory is most money-making film, you've achieved it. And you would not have achieved it without it.
Right.
It's only the orange outfit that helps get you there, right? Without it, you would not have made that. You just have to look at Timothée Chalamet's other films to know that. And certainly his more artistic films and the films of Safdie, right? But if the goal is to get him that win, then that is not the right strategy. And so the same way we were able to sort of call out a moment like that happened last year on the awards circuit, on the Oscar race, is the same way that, we feel adamant about the most appropriate thing is to call out everyone who's making Timothée Chalamet's loss in Best Actor about ballet opera. It's not about ballet opera. Ballots were cast before that. This loss is a reflection of a myriad of factors, part of which certainly may be more valid than others. For example, there are going to be some people who admire the performance and dislike the character, point blank.
Right.
There are going to be some viewers who cannot finish a Safdie film, point blank. Right. There are going to be some voters who think he's too young and he can't do anything about that. He can't make himself older automatically. Right. We've talked about that. The loss here again was some of that marketing strategy. Unfortunately, and again, I don't think you can ever escape this. I'm sure there were some people who were not thrilled with the whole he's dating a Kardashian thing.
Right.
And I want to believe that that's the smallest amount, that we're voting based on merit. I really do believe that the majority of people vote on merit. And he just came up a little bit short. And so
I'm not 100% sure. I agree with you. I think that in an ideal world, factors like that would be minuscule, as to why he doesn't win. But I do think some of these more outside factors outside of the performance, played a bigger role. But I get your point. Yeah.
Maybe you're right. Maybe they do play a bigger role, and maybe it's not always merit,
which is not fair, by the way.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to knock certain performers. I do think it's partly political, so to speak. I'm sure that the desire to give it to Sandra Bullock for The Blind Side was overwhelming over
100%.
her work on the actual movie.
100%.
And again, what the film accomplished at the box office had a lot to do with it. What she's accomplished at the box office had a lot to do with it. And Sandra Bullock is a very good actress.
And just liking her. And just liking her.
And just exactly the way she campaigned and presented herself is a factor. That being said, you also had Monique that year, who was heavily criticized and was still able to win the award because of merit, in my opinion. And therefore, you're right. It's a little bit of a dance between those two things. But I don't like this narrative that, Ballet Opera Gate cost him the Oscar. I think that's short-sighted, and it's just that's a decision that people are making because they weren't sharp enough throughout the year. And I think we were pointing out a lot of stumbles on the way to this moment, and a lot of miscalculations possibly. We talked about after we saw it, and maybe even before, I think when it premiered, just the idea that by the very nature of the film it is, we would be having a completely different discussion had Marty Supreme been nominated for 5 or 6 or 9 Academy Awards last year, including Best Actor, and this year had been nominated for A Complete Unknown. He can win for playing Bob Dylan.
Right.
It's going to be extremely difficult to win for playing Marty Mauser. It doesn't matter how old you are. Right. And I think you can put Kieran Culkin in the role of Marty Mauser, and he would probably still lose. And Kieran Culkin is extremely endearing, right? And he has a certain sort of legacy in the industry. I don't think that Kieran Culkin could win any type of Oscar for playing Marty Mauser. That's just my impression.
I don't know. Okay, so I'm hearing you, and I think it's valid, but I have 2 things to say. One is that, again, I just want to stress that it's been strange to see kind of not just the change in the narrative of the Marty Supreme phenomenon, it's destined to win Best Actor and to get nominated for several Academy Awards, walks out with 0 wins and doesn't win Best Actor. That's been really fascinating to see the change, the change of the tide. And again, being influenced by all these other factors. And it kind of sucks to see him not kind of be the kind of Timothée Chalamet that we're used to seeing in terms of, at these awards. And, again, there's something very accessible, very, affable, very, charming about him. And I just feel like the lights were a little bit dim.
Right.
When you saw him on the red carpet, I know there was a video that was out about someone was doing it an exact, like, second by second, play by play of him completely escaping or avoiding Steven Spielberg.
Which is the most ridiculous thing of life.
I will say the video did look a little bit like he was trying to avoid him from an outsider's perspective, but I get what you're saying. It's, it was crazy.
But exactly, like, I'm just saying, people really, I think some outlets really exploited the upside down nature of this narrative, from being the front runner to being he's going to lose, or he can lose, or I can't believe he lost.
But I also think,
the things that he said.
But I also think that Timothée Chalamet dipping his toe into sort of this more mainstream pop culture with some of the campaign tactics and dating Kylie Jenner kind of gave permission to some of these, media outlets to kind of run with it, in a way. You know what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
In a way, his participation with that kind of world kind of, came with him being open to that, to that other kind of world.
I think you're right. I just think it's a shame and in poor taste, in the sense that you have those individuals who are covering that moment when Timothée Chalamet is, just barely, escaping contact with Steven Spielberg. It'd be great if they were actually put on another Safdie film. And maybe that's just an assumption I'm making, but if they could cover the
100%.
Safdie film
They probably
that
have
is
no idea
not
who's
marketed that way. That is not marketed that way with the same amount of passion. Then then heaven knows what would have made significantly more money, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
but like I said, it was just unfortunate to see those lights dim.
right.
And I felt that, especially as in the latter leg of this awards campaigning train, the lights were dim,
Right.
and it's unusual to see him in that light.
Right.
I think a part of me, and we've discussed this privately, I think a part of me feels like he's maybe bitter, bitter
Maybe.
about kind of, not even necessarily the change
Or the
in
loss.
the momentum or even the loss. But as you were saying, this feeling of, being exploited.
Right.
And, being, taken out of context, maybe in a way, or,
Right.
or, feeling like people have misconstrued his intentions and his words, that there's a bitterness there that wasn't there, all these other years that we've seen him kind of in the, Hollywood circuit.
And there's, I mean, to continue on what you're saying, everyone talked last year about the villain being Emilia Perez, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, specifically Carlos Sofia Gascon, probably.
And specifically Carlos Sofia Gascon. And I wonder if a little bit of that has rubbed into the whole Mario Supreme thing. Another factor that did not help Mario Supreme is, it finally being revealed why Josh and Benny were not necessarily working together.
Well, possibly, again, even that's an assumption that's what.
Maybe that's an assumption. Again, there are some decisions being made as to when to address something, when not to address something that are maybe questionable. And again, I would wonder if being more upfront about it could have saved a lot of trouble. Like couldn't this have been announced before the movies went into production, before the movies were going to be released? Would that not have been better? It's almost like, I guess in this industry especially, you're only going to escape, being outed for so long. Eventually they're going to out you. And so I do think that may be another miscalculation worth considering. I do think that played a factor in ultimately Marty Supreme walking out with 0 Oscars. I don't think that's the only factor, and I want to touch upon that for a second as we continue this discussion. I want to say Marty Supreme didn't get any wins, and we had called this after BAFTA. After BAFTA, when it didn't get any wins, we had said, there is a trend where, like, if you got nothing at BAFTA, that's a very good predecessor for you getting nothing at the Academy Awards. And Marty Supreme did really well in the lead up to nominations. It was a top 5 film. It was nominated in a bunch of places. But I want to say that it also reiterates something that maybe we overlook, which is being a top 5 film is fantastic. And it's great for when you get your nominations. But there's a little bit of a downside, which is when you're a top 5 film, usually one of you is going to walk out with nothing. And so if you look at the DGA award nominees, right? And I was looking back on this on the lead up to the Oscars. If you look at the DGA nominees, the nominees for the Directors Guild of America, which has long been sort of the gold standard for predicting who the 5 favorite for the Oscars Best Picture are, every single time or most of the time they have a film that will get nothing, that will end up winning no Academy Award. And so last year, for example, they gave a nomination to A Complete Unknown. No wins, right? The year before that, a nomination for Killers of the Flower Moon. No wins. The year before that, there was a bunch of movies that got no wins, whether it was Tar or Fabelmans. Elvis. Actually, Elvis didn't get a DGA nomination. But in 2021, Licorice Pizza was a DGA nominee. It didn't get any wins. And so, like, it's great to fight tooth and nail, as studios do, fight tooth and nail during the Oscar race and during the yearly campaign to score a top 5 DGA nomination and sort of wrestle your way into being a top 5 movie. But so many of them don't focus on the idea that, okay, now that I'm 1 in 5, right? One of us statistically should walk away with nothing. So then I have to fight extra hard to make sure that I'm not that movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's something that that's the other thing I want to mention about Timothée Chalamet's loss. What you had said, and maybe that can transition us into this next topic of Best Actor, is that you said Marty Mauser is not the typical kind of role that would win the Academy Award for Best Actor. And I wholeheartedly believe that that's true as well. But I do feel like I don't think that Michael B. Jordan's performance is the kind of performance that typically wins Best Actor either. I do think that there was a lot of, because of the shift from the Marty Supreme sort of narrative, that opened an avenue for another person, for another actor to kind of seize the moment. And of the choices that there were there, obviously the one that, the industry was most excited about was Michael B. Jordan. I think we talked about this in a previous episode about, how he represents this sort of new Hollywood, but in a manner that I think is very palatable to the Academy voters. He's a very good actor, very strong actor. We've been following him for years. I've been following his work since Fruitvale Station. I think you might have seen him on The Wire.
Yeah.
Friday Night Lights. So we've been following him for a very long time, and he's a terrific actor. But it's not the kind of performance that you would expect to win Best Actor, in my opinion. I don't think that, Sinners kind of provides the best platform to see all of Michael B. Jordan's sort of range and his, some of the aspects of his craft that I value the most. I don't know if you feel the same way, if you feel differently. I'm very happy for his win, but I just wanted to point that out, that I'm not sure that I see his performance in Sinners, and maybe even Sinners as a whole, to be the kind of film that typically wins a Best Actor Oscar. And I think, again, a big reason why we saw that outcome was what happened with Timothée Chalamet, and that tide of change.
I mean, I think that Timothée Chalamet thing was a factor, but I do think that the narrative, maybe taking hold on, let's inspect how Timothée Chalamet lost this as opposed to how Michael B. Jordan won it. And I think that you're right. Certainly, in my opinion, it is not the type of performance that traditionally wins an Oscar, but I also think it makes sense with where the trend is, because I don't know that I believe that traditionally Michelle Yeoh's performance in Everything Everywhere All at Once would beat Lydia Tarr. But by virtue of Lydia Tarr being largely unlikable, it makes sense for Cate Blanchett to lose.
That's
it doesn't help that Cate Blanchett already has two, right? And Everything Everywhere All at Once presents history. Right. And again, it helps that, for example, Michael B. Jordan, I think there's just such a few group of Black actors that have won that award. And again, you're sort of catching up here, trying to make right on that. And that's something that I think the campaign was able to exploit, and good for them, and I loved Michael's speech, shouting out everyone who was on that position. And I'm sure just years away from finally seeing another actress win Best Actress, a Black actress. That's going to be amazing. But again, that's part of what's helping the campaign. I do think that Marty Mauser being unlikable is part of it. I think Sinners being the most nominated film of the year was a part of why Michael was able to win. I think you're 100% right. Michael B. Jordan should not be a one-time nominee. And so on paper, it reads possibly a little bit like, how can Michael B. Jordan win on his first time when Timothée Chalamet is, a 3-time lead actor nominee?
Right. Well, I wouldn't say that personally, but I think some people would.
Some people would say that. Some people are going to complain about Timothée Chalamet. I think he has a nomination.
Timothy?
Yeah, Timothy has 3 lead acting nominations because of Bob Dylan, the performance from Bob Dylan last year. And then you have Michael. This is his first nomination, not unlike, for example, Michelle Yeoh or Brendan Fraser. But Michael should have been there years before. Michael should have been in strong consideration for Fruitvale Station. He should have been strong consideration for Creed. And so many of his collaborations with Ryan Coogler, should have resulted in a nomination by now. And so it's sort of like, yes, Timothée Chalamet is possibly in a position where it's a little bit easier, or maybe the community is a little bit more prepared to recognize him and nominate him. But when it finally came time to give him a win, they were a little bit hesitant. And the community at large finally caught up to the idea that Michael should have been here years or before already. And they said, well, if I have the opportunity to give him the win, I'm not gonna let him being a one-time nominee stop that. I'm not going to let the fact that it's a vampire movie stop that. And so I do think you're right. It's not the traditional role that wins an Oscar, but I think it is somewhat on trend. And I do think Marty Mauser.
What about the traditional performance?
Yes.
Not just role.
Right. Like I said, I think the performance, in my opinion, you could possibly have drawn a stronger distinction between the two brothers. That being said, I wonder if On Trend is the narrative possibly
more important than the performance.
Exactly.
Right.
And so just the idea that he's been overlooked so often, just the idea that he, really approaches his films with passion and really helps them speak to an audience and find an audience.
Well, again, like what I said, what he represents.
Right. Exactly. He's very much, I think, in our opinion, someone like a sort of a Brad Pitt, DiCaprio figure where he's going to lend, his stardom to these meaningful movies, and he's going to boost their profile, and he's going to do good work on them.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to do a film that he doesn't believe in.
And I feel like you could feel that in the room. I think back to what I was saying at the top, in terms of speeches, I do feel like his was the speech that I think most people were excited about in the room. I think that's where you felt the most passion from the audience. When they were seeing his win. It just felt like what he had said on stage about people betting on him, the industry betting on him. I think that you could feel that in the room, most people there, were rooting for him.
Yes.
Wanted to see him have that moment. And I think that was a big reason why, things turned out the way that they did, despite there being a category where I feel like there were other contenders that could have seized the moment. Ethan Hawke, you talk about Timothée Chalamet's third nomination, and Michael B. Jordan's first. He should have been there much sooner than that, of course. This is Ethan Hawke's fifth nomination, his third as an actor, his first as a leading man. And yet, he still loses.
Right.
Wagner Moura was a huge critics' favorite since Cannes and can't capitalize on the moment despite being in a Best Picture nominee.
Right.
And in what was an early favorite for a foreign language film.
Right.
Leo DiCaprio, I understand, because he already has one. Okay, that's the only one you can exclude. But in a way, the other four are kind of, after the Timothée Chalamet kind of, change of tide, were on kind of even footing in a way that any of those three could have capitalized on their being, on becoming the favorite, and it was Michael B. Jordan, which I think is in no small part due to the SAG win.
Yes,
I think that was crucial.
Yeah,
I think it was crucial that Wagner Moura was not nominated for the SAG. You and I, looking back, there are foreign language performances that do win these categories. Think about Marianne Cotillard and La Vie en Rose. It does happen, but it does not happen in the lead acting races if you didn't get a SAG nomination. Yeah. So if that is eventually going to be a narrative of the night, that a foreign language performance won one of the two top leading acting awards, they got nominated for the SAG.
Yes.
That's a big miss for Wagner Moura. He even missed the BAFTA.
Right.
And I don't know if he made the, I don't think he made the shortlist.
I don't think he did.
That's another miss. And then again, Ethan Hawke couldn't capitalize on his career either.
Right.
Yeah. So I find that interesting.
I think you're right. It's 100% interesting. And I also think it's been a great year for Best Actor because it was ultra competitive. And I think it also illustrated well the way the dynamics of this Oscar race sort of fall, which is in phase 2, you're only trying to beat your competition, right? And it's very much about, what your advantages are and can you exploit them. And I think Sinners and Michael B. Jordan's campaign was able to do that. And in a way, as you said, that Wagner Moura's wasn't. There was just too many shortcomings. Same thing with Ethan Hawke. But it's also massively interesting because, again, it was so competitive that this year one could have made the argument had timing just been a little bit different. This race illustrates how timing is everything. If it was Marty Mauser in 2025's Oscar and it was Bob Dylan in 2026, I think Bob Dylan would have won. Despite the opera ballet commentary. If Jesse Plemons had not been nominated for Power of the Dog, would he have gotten in for Begonia?
I think he would have.
I think he would have. Could he have made things interesting? I think he would have also. You know what I mean?
I love that performance.
It's a great performance, but also Oscars, they like a villain and they like a complicated character and they like a showy performance like that. Not unlike, for example, Joaquin's performance in Joker. And so it's massively interesting to think of the different ways. For example, had Leo gotten nominated for Killers of the Flower Moon, would he have been snubbed this year? Yeah, probably. He didn't need both those nominations.
That's a good point.
His nomination here has everything to do with him being overlooked for Killers of the Flower Moon, right? And so I think it was a fantastic year for actor because it sort of illustrated how multi-layered the whole idea of an Oscar campaign, launching film and performances into the Oscar conversation is, how volatile it is, and how separate these different phases are, right? Between launching them, getting into a space where we're actually debating who are our favorites, and then when you're finally in that space, right? Like I said, Wagner Moura is able to get in possibly largely due to that Golden Globe win, right? But had he not gotten in and had someone, like we said, Jesse Plemons gotten in, could it have made it a more interesting, more tight race? It's possible. So yeah, that was my big takeaway. Great to see Michael there. It was certainly another moment, and maybe we'll talk about this in one of the other categories, but another moment that sort of signified that SAG is very much at the top of the mountain when it comes to dictating the way the acting categories are going to go.
I think you're very right that this year proved that, but I will say last year they still got two wrong in Timothée Chalamet and Demi Moore.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, maybe you're right. I mean, well, I think they had a bounce back this year.
Yeah,
right.
Because 2022 they did bangers also.
Yeah,
all four.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it was a very interesting thing, Best Actor.
And it was nice to see him have that moment. You know?
Yes,
he's certainly the future.
Yeah.
In a very meaningful way.
Yeah.
And in a very positive way.
Right.
And sticking with the actings for a little bit longer, supporting actress was a fascinating race this year between three actresses, all in Warner Brothers films. All of them winning separate, high honors: the Golden Globe, the BAFTA, and the SAG. Amy Madigan became the favorite after the SAG win. You and I were betting on Wunmi Mosaku for the longest time, and unfortunately, we got it wrong.
Up until Oscar
night. We have to eat crow.
Yeah,
we got that wrong. Part of the you did say that it was going to be tough for Sinners to win both actor and supporting actress.
Historically, it is not easy. It's not easy. And
even Everything Everywhere All at Once does it.
Yes, and what I was going to say, and yeah, they did it brilliantly 3 times. But what I was going to say is, unfortunately, I couldn't come up with a moment in history where 2 Black actors were able to win those categories, or a pair of categories together, for the same movie. We're kind of talking about the idea that Octavia Spencer could win for The Help, but Viola Davis ends up losing to Meryl Streep. That kind of idea.
Right.
And so I thought it would be another historic moment, but that didn't come to pass.
Right.
I thought that BAFTA was really going to be what broke for her.
Me too.
But the win ended up going to Amy Madigan.
Amy Madigan, who did not get an eye for the BAFTA.
Yeah.
But she did make the shortlist.
Yes.
And I don't know how I feel about it. I think it's really cool. Like I said, that trajectory of that contention, is incredible to witness. But everything was telling me that, again, because she was a solo nominee and because it's not the kind of thing they typically go for an acting Oscar, that she was going to be passed up. And that didn't happen. And I have to think that it ended up having a lot to do with her competition. There were just too many cons about Teyana Taylor winning, not enough credits, kind of spiky, prickly character. And then Wunmi Mosaku, maybe they didn't want to give Sinners 2 acting wins, and Michael B. Jordan had already kind of amassed this momentum that Wunmi Mosaku wasn't able to have herself because of the SAG loss.
Right.
I don't know, but it's a strange win.
It is.
It's a strange win.
Yeah.
It's just, even if just looking at it on paper, it's a strange win.
Are we overlooking possibly where what ended up giving Amy Madigan a slight edge was, for example, that Teyana and Wunmi, that there wasn't a strong second,
right,
so to speak, but instead they were sort of 3 kind of cobbled up, tied together, right? And in the face of that, maybe the vote for Amy Madigan ends up winning out. Why? Because she's a former nominee, unlike her other nominees in that category.
That's
right?
True.
Not
she's
Wunmi,
the only veteran.
Sentimental value. Could it also be because, not only is she a veteran, but she's been working for so long, people made a lot of mention about that idea. I think you said 40 years between nominations, which might have been the longest stretch,
that's
right?
The longest ever.
And I'm sure that's a very good headline to campaign on. The idea that she's Ed Harris's partner, and Ed Harris is an iconic actor and a really esteemed actor, and has yet to win an Academy Award and has a bunch of nominations.
It's kind of a win for their family.
Exactly, which sometimes happens in supporting, whether it's Jamie Lee Curtis or Laura Dern. It's a win for the artists of that little tiny branch of artists that the Academy recognizes. That tends to happen sometimes.
Yeah, 100%.
Could those have been the things that broke for them?
I also think that they're, along with what you're saying about there being like a three-way horse and that affecting all of them, but particularly, Sinners in One Battle, that, in terms of Sinners in One Battle being the favorite films, and there might have been a little bit of a split there in that, when it came to supporting actress, you either sided with One Battle or Sinners. Sinners was my favorite, so Wunmi gets my vote, or One Battle was my favorite, so Teyana gets my vote, and they kind of vote split it in a way, and that allowed an opening for someone like Amy Madigan for Weapons.
Yeah, and maybe it could also be a factor where if you liked Weapons, it was the only category where you could give it a win, right? Versus I think partly what you're saying here, which is not only could there be a vote split between Teyana and Wunmi, but also this could be one of the few categories where you're okay not giving it to a Sinners or a One Battle.
But here's another thing that I just thought of that I think might have also had some say as to why Amy Madigan won, and that's that international voters.
Let's talk about that.
Also couldn't. I think that because of the way the category was set up, there wasn't enough of one person grabbing most of the international votes. So, for example, you had two sentimental value actresses, so there might have been a little bit of a vote split there in terms of the international vote. But let's imagine that that's not true, and if there was an international vote for sentimental value, it would go to Inga because she's the international actor. Okay, but then I think that too many international voters probably were passionate about a movie like One Battle After Another, and then Teyana got their vote.
Right.
Or some international voters might have really liked Sinners, and Sinners got their vote.
Well, the fact that Wunmi is an international actor.
Exactly.
Actor from the UK.
Exactly. So I don't think that there was enough of somebody to get the bulk of international votes that might have put them at the, at the top of the pack. And which again allowed an opening for Amy Madigan, who was the domestic favorite.
Yeah, like the home turf favorite in terms of the U.S. Yeah,
exactly. I think that's something to consider too.
And I will say also, it's another bit of how the pendulum swung towards the SAG this year. Michael B. Jordan and Amy Madigan. Yeah. Right? That did not happen at BAFTA or at Golden Globe. It's interesting because one thing we kept saying this year was, can Amy Madigan really win over when Demi Moore lost? Right. We talked about that. Right. And so what do you think was the separation there? You just think it was the second nomination? Or do you think also this idea, we talk about it, lead bias?
Yes, I certainly think that there's a big reason is if we're talking about supporting actress is not the same as talking about best actress. That's number one. But number two, I also want to say that I think, the substance is more overt with its sort of, makeup and physicality and kind of creature feature of it all,
body horror,
body horror of it all, in a way that Weapons is sinister but entertaining, but not super art house, not maybe art house at all. In that you would have people watch The Substance who were just going to straight up not like it, and there were ballots.
Even if there is larger commentary on it,
exactly.
Too.
There were people who, said in the anonymous ballots, if you want to read if you want to read into them at all, that they hated the movie. I think Weapons is a more accessible film, just by the kind of film that it is. So I think that helps as well. But certainly the supporting versus lead thing, I think, is a big deal.
Now, one thing that I want to say, which is kind of interesting to at least sort of put into context, is that the win for Amy Madigan in supporting actress is the first time we have a solo acting win, meaning a film that only got one nomination, the nomination that it won, right? Since Julianne Moore and Still Alice.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I do think it's interesting that, and before that, I believe it's Christopher Plummer in Beginners. And so I do think...
I thought it was Penelope Cruz, but yeah, you're right, Christopher Plummer.
Yeah, Penelope Cruz for...
Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
Oh, no, I think that was a little bit right next to Christopher Plummer. But I do think that there's this idea that being an older actor, a veteran actor, and being an actor who, like Julianne Moore, has just never won might have helped, right?
That didn't help Demi Moore.
It didn't help Demi, but that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't help
an actor in their 60s. You know, who knows if I'm going to get this chance again? They still said, nah.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say. As ridiculous as it sounds, I'm trying to say it's easier for Demi Moore to lose that category because she's not the same type of veteran that Amy Madigan or Christopher Plummer are on their second nominations, right? Both of them, unlike Demi Moore's first. But also the fact that at the end of the day, The Substance is going to have a win, and The Substance is a five-time nominee, right? It's almost a little bit easier to get it done, certainly when you've been there before, like Christopher Plummer or Amy Madigan, even Julianne Moore. Obviously, so many nominations before that win. It's easier to get it done in supporting, but it's also easier to get it done when you're by yourself. It's almost like there's a heightened urgency that The Substance did not have, because at the end, The Substance was one of the most talked about films of the year and a Best Picture nominee. So I guess in a weird sort of way, I'm saying, had Weapons scored that Best Picture nomination, maybe Amy Madigan would not have won. In a weird sort of way. But yeah, I think that was another fascinating race this year.
It was, absolutely. I felt so convinced that I was going to be Wunmi Mosaku.
Yeah.
I think you and I really felt that.
Yes, yeah, you're right. And so I think the other acting award went to Jessie Buckley, and was very predictable, but I think she gave a very impassioned speech, which we all knew she was going to do.
Yeah. She's great in Hamnet.
I do want to sort of bridge our conversation on supporting actress a little bit. I want to talk about that international thing that you're talking about, because I saw it play out, at least in one category, that to me was borderline shocking, but the more I thought about it, the more it makes sense. And I'll preface it by saying that I think Netflix ended up winning 7 awards in total that night, which is actually, I think, its studio high. I don't think it's ever broken 7. We had predicted it to break 7 because we had The Singers winning. We had predicted it to break 7 and get a high of 8, which would be a studio high. And the one that it ended up losing that we predicted,
which, by the way, I mentioned to you that I felt nervous about.
Yes, was a win for. Was a loss in Best Documentary. Best Documentary, The Favorite, our prediction was The Perfect Neighbor from Netflix, from double nominee Geeta, who was sort of had a historic moment by getting 2 nominations, a nomination for documentary short and a nomination for documentary. It did not come to pass, and she lost, unfortunately. And the win ended up going to Mr. Nobody Against Putin. And I think this was, mostly a surprise to some people.
100% the favorite was The Perfect Neighbor, and by a good distance. The number 2 was Mr. Nobody, and that's a lot of it due to it winning the BAFTA.
The BAFTA, obviously, we've talked about in our previous episodes. You can check them out. But we knew it was going to be a tight one between them. We knew it was coming up strong at the final minute, especially everything that was going on with Denmark and Greenland. And it's a Danish co-production, was submitted for foreign film from Denmark, did not get into the shortlist, did not get a nomination either. But the nomination for documentary was major. The reason why I bring it up is because I think that you and I would agree that what pushes it over the top is the international vote.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you agree with that?
I agree, yeah.
Okay. Same kind of thing that we're saying has played out in other places.
Right.
This year, we had a new rule, quote unquote. The new rule being that you cannot vote for a winner
unless you see all
of them. And so in my mind, something that I have a suspicion played out in documentary film was that a significant portion of voters did not see all the movies.
In that particular category.
And so when you have someone maybe like Amy Madigan who's able to get in there when the international vote is sort of canceling each other out in some places, or, maybe when Michael B. Jordan, who maybe isn't the most international choice, he didn't win BAFTA, when he's able to win, it's because a lot of voters were able to see all the films and were therefore eligible to see all of them. In documentary, this is the only place where they're nominated. They're not going to be 2 or 3 time nominees. Documentaries get nominated for one category, best documentary, and that's it. Right. So there's little incentive.
There's an inherent bias.
Right.
Like, I'm going to watch the narrative features. I don't have time for the documentary features.
There's little incentive because they don't have multiple nominations. There's little incentive to watch them because if you watch them, you're only well informed in one category versus if you watch Frankenstein, you're well informed from 8 to 9. Warrior Supreme the same, Hamlet the same. And so because of that, I think voters leave it for last or neglect it. And in this year, having neglected it or overlooked it or left it for last, they very quickly saw that they just became ineligible to vote for it. And so they may have seen The Perfect Neighbor. It may have been their favorite. It may have been the movie they decided to vote for. But because they had not seen the other ones, like Cutting Through Rocks, which didn't even have an appropriate release, they were deemed ineligible to watch it. And what I think is that more international voters participated in this category and committed to watching those films. And because they committed to watching those films, maybe because they have a different focus or a different priority setting, or maybe just they're just more interested, or maybe they were more widely available to them throughout the year through festivals or programming, etc., they were able to participate in this category at a higher clip. And then therefore the race breaks for Mr. Nobody Against Putin.
I think that's an excellent point. I would just say that, we were hearing from, the press and Variety and the Hollywood Reporter that voters were not, because it's the honor system, I think, in a way. I don't know how much they're,
being policed.
Exactly. To, see all the nominees before voting in a category. We had heard of some people who, just checkmarked their little box and they were able to vote for the category, even though they haven't seen all the films. So I guess your reasoning, if that's true, your reasoning would imply that there was a lot of loyalty to the honor system, which I don't necessarily buy. Human beings are not that way. So that's the only caveat that I would say. It's a fascinating argument, and I think it sounds very plausible. But what about all those people that we were hearing were just voting even though they hadn't seen it?
You're right.
All the films.
We don't have experience with the actual platform, so we can't speak to it. I would love to see the platform at work, because I do feel like there may be something there where just more international voters outnumbered the voters that were based in the U.S., who maybe would have favored The Perfect Neighbor, but just did not get a chance to vote on it. So I thought that was an interesting topic.
Right. I think that's absolutely astute, and certainly one of the shockers of the night.
Now,
sure.
I do think it was a great speech, a really pointed speech, and it was one of my favorite speeches of the night. And I think it's a worthy winner too. I'm sad that Gita wasn't able to get the win, but I'm also fairly confident that Gita will get the win in the future. That being said, she did make history. She had 2 nominations for 2 excellent pieces of work. I want to bridge that with another sort of very pointed moment, another very pointed speech, which was the speech for international film, when Hakim Trier ends up winning, and just very quickly, Sentimental ended up being the favorite at the end, especially with all those nominations, the BAFTA win. First win for Norway, very much the way we had called it. Brazil winning back to back. It's just really difficult to happen. Really unlikely. And when they have an opportunity to give it to a country that hasn't won before, especially one as well positioned as Sentimental Value,
with 4 acting nominations, a directing nomination, and a screenplay nomination.
You and I, especially me, I had sort of said maybe this is a moment where Panahi can sneak in with everything that had been going on with Iran at that moment, but that didn't come to pass. Hakim Trier definitely had very pointed words for the state of the world, appropriate words. I can kind of bridge that between that and the documentary feature winner, Mr. Nobody Against Putin. But I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. And The Secret Agent, like you said, it was an early favorite after that Globe win, and it certainly seemed to be the favorite amongst regional critics. But Sentimental Value was just not going to walk out empty-handed.
Yeah.
And you and I said it on our last episode. If Stellan Skarsgård's not winning this, then it absolutely has to win foreign language film, because it's just
you can't give it 0.
Especially since in a year of 5, I think we're in agreement that those would have been the 5 films.
Absolutely.
Marty, Sentimental Value, Hamnet, Sinners, One Battle.
Maybe, I guess, unless you want to knock out the foreign film, maybe. But I think you're right. With 9 nominations, it's a very muscular choice. For the
option. Speaking of who could have gotten that spot, Frankenstein, without a directing nomination, and with only one acting nomination versus a film that got a directing nomination and
possible. 4. It's possible, but I see what you're saying. And I think I definitely broke it for sentimental, but also just again timing. It's always timing. Very difficult to give it to The Secret Agent when I'm Still Here won. This whole year, as regional critics were handing out international film, the majority of them did not give it to I'm Still Here.
Right.
So it's just a matter of timing.
Yeah.
Had I'm Still Here not won last year, would The Secret Agent have won? Hands down. The Secret Agent would have won.
As long as Sentimental was winning something else.
Yeah, I'll give you that. As long as we can split, and I don't know why they wouldn't. I mean, last year they gave I'm Still Here foreign film and Emilia Perez, supporting actress and a song. Right. So I think there's room to split it,
And finally, One Battle was the big winner, winning 6 Academy Awards. It won Best Picture, it won Best Director, it won Best Adapted Screenplay. 6 was sort of on par with what we've seen in the last few years. Oppenheimer won 7, I believe. Everything Everywhere won 7. Anora won 6. I believe, no, actually 5 because it couldn't win 6. So that made sense. And I think the fact that there were 2 juggernauts between Sinners being the most nominated film ever and One Battle, I think that might have taken some of that, that possible 7th Oscar might have gotten somewhere like cinematography or something. But very much in the tide that we were expecting. Obviously, there was no question that this was PTA's year.
I mean, Sinners made it interesting at the end.
I guess a little bit, but, in reality, no question about it. Paul Thomas Anderson is a hero of ours. It's incredibly beautiful to see him have this very deserved moment. But, PTA's work will stand the test of time, and not in the slightest because of whatever awards it might win or an Oscar, whether that be an Oscar or anything else. He's not a filmmaker that does films for any award's sake, but still very, very, very beautiful to see him have this moment. Very deserved, best film of the year. I think that kind of, made this Oscar season a little bit more special, I guess.
I agree. I think it's a very deserving film. It's great to see him finally have that moment. He sort of broke the PTA curse, I guess, when he won Adapted Screenplay. As Cassandra Kulakunda said, she won one before him, but he won Screenplay. He mentioned how he forgot to shout out his cast at one point. It's happy to have it. Best doesn't exist. He said you make a guy work really hard for this. We're talking about an individual, an artist who had, including this year, 14 nominations between producing, directing, writing, all the way back to 1997, right? So certainly one of the oldest gentlemen there. Certainly, that's beyond Christopher Nolan by a few years. So certainly someone of his status had not won one yet. His number was eventually going to come up, one would hope. I did think we mentioned it on our Twitter. You can follow us at Academy Anon. But the win for PTA in any category this year, let alone all 3, finally, sets him apart from artists like Robert Altman and Federico Fellini, who have had so many nominations in directing and writing, and never scored a win. Yeah. Directing, writing, producing, Robert Altman. And so it was great to see him sort of not be in the history books alongside Mavericks, icons like Altman and Fellini, and to get a competitive win as opposed to an honorary Oscar like those 2 titans did. I think, we have to talk about Warner Brothers and the fact that this was such a important year for Warner Brothers. Of course, they had a terrible year last year. We talked about it, even though they got Dune some wins and a Best Picture nomination, but they completely dominated, made history of Sinners, most nominations, 13 nominations for Paul Thomas Anderson's film, the most any of his films have ever gotten. They score picture, director, screenplay, as you said, but also, there's not a huge trajectory for Warner Brothers films winning this award, and so it joins films like Argo and The Departed and $1 Million Baby, Unforgiven. These are the most recent Warner Brothers Best Picture winners. Of course, it comes at a moment when Warner Brothers is bowing out. But But Warner Brothers just decimated this year. I mean, in total, it's 6 wins for One Battle, 4 for Sinners. That's 10. Weapons gives it 11. And if you include F1, which they helped distribute theatrically, that's 12.
Right.
And that's just a massive haul. And I think possibly even one of their biggest hauls. You have to look at, for example, a movie like My Fair Lady in the 60s. That's their most winningest film, or one of their most winningest films, with 8, right? One Battle couldn't get there, neither could Sinners. But you have to look at something like 2004, last time they dominated like that. Remember 2004, $1 Million Baby, won Best Picture,
right.
Picture, Director, 2 actings, and The Aviator just completely took so many tech awards, including cinematography and costume design, and it won for Kate Blanchett. I think that was a year where they scored like 10 between all their movies. A year like in the 70s, French Connection, and I think A Clockwork Orange is there. I think they ended up scoring like maybe 9 wins that year between French Connection and Clute and Summer of 42. And so this was just a historic year for Warner Brothers in terms of the Oscars, for what is also a historic moment for this industry and for that huge legacy studio. And I think that's going to be written in the history books, that these wins, that this historic night is concurrent with this moment, which is scary, and which we're going to see, how it develops in the coming months, in the coming years. Something I will say that I'd love your commentary on is, this time last year, do you remember what I was saying? Do you?
No.
Okay, and this is on record, so anyone can hear this. Please, our previous episodes are up, and if you're ever curious, please do. On our Post-Mortem, after Honora finally wins, one of the first things that I said was, I think the win for Sean Baker, a massive win where he gets even an editing win. He wins as an editor, not just as a producer, director, you know what I mean, a writer. He wins as an editor. To me, it kind of threw the rule book out there, and it sort of said, it doesn't really matter what your history it is. It just matters timing, the moment. And I think I ended up saying that, the likelihood is that Paul Thomas Anderson was never going to win, that he would never win. That's what I said a year ago.
Really?
Yeah. And so I couldn't be happier to say that I was wrong.
Right.
And that, these things are largely unpredictable, and anything that can happen will happen. And it's a great thing to see in this instance, even though I'm sure it will exist in other instances where it's a very disappointing thing to see. So nobody knows anything. But I guess this is a year where it sort of says, his legacy does matter. Everything he's done has mattered and has brought him to this point. I also want to iterate that, very much what you're seeing is, you're seeing these individuals who have had a large hand in crafting contemporary appreciation for cinema and for the art form finally get a chance to go on that stage, whether they've been industry titans like Christopher Nolan or Paul Thomas Anderson, or have been on the fringes that everyone has been paying attention to, like Sean Baker. You do have to play by their rules, right? Christopher Nolan cannot win an Oscar unless he gets a bunch of acting nominees and he gets a SAG win. That's just, he sort of has to evolve into a filmmaker that's able to meet that thing where they want him to do. They want him to be able to be an actor's director, and they want a film of Christopher Nolan to do the impossible and win a SAG Ensemble Award. In the same way, in my opinion, where it's an amazing win for One Battle, and I think it's a very deserving winner. But when I put it against those movies, The Departed, Unforgiven, The French Connection, there's DNA there. This is a Paul Thomas Anderson film, but it's also very much a Warner Brothers film. There are car chases, there are guns, there's violence, there's sex, there's commentary, right? It's a very muscular piece, right? Even if it does have its subversive elements, that it's very much a Paul Thomas Anderson picture, he sort of was able to do in his terms what they've wanted him to do, which is deliver a big blockbuster Warner Brothers film, with a bunch of car chases. And sort of same thing with Sean Baker, where yes, Sean Baker's able to get that win, but he had to become, in my opinion, a more pointed filmmaker with his commentary, right? A commentary that speaks to, in my opinion, an international discussion, not unlike Oppenheimer, not unlike One Battle After Another. Those films may be set in the U.S., but the ramifications for what they mean as art and the discussion they're having in their historical moment, in their historical context, has massive meaning for the international community and certainly for the international film community. And that I think is aces for Anora that even wins the Palme d'Or.
Right.
And so I think it's interesting to observe those things, in my opinion.
I think that's very well said, and I think that's very astute and very true. I'll just, repeat again that I don't think this Oscar win is the pinnacle of PTA's career. I think the Oscars are, problematic to say the least, and that PTA's legacy will, stand the test of time and outlive all of us. But it's just nice for him to get his, due flowers, in whatever capacity, whether that be the Oscars or something else, any awards body. And like I said, PTA, the master, and the most rebound of rebounds for Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And bittersweet, right?
Yes.
Very bittersweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I can't wait to see how this discussion evolves into next year. A lot of patterns we've observed, shifts in the industry, for example. I mean, the SAG is now down twice from a SAG Ensemble win. They've been off twice. Kind of interesting. Got a new category. Be interesting to see how that plays out in casting.
Stunt is coming up too.
New category coming in, phasing out the way the Oscars have been traditionally presented on basic with ABC, for example. We'll see what happens there.
I think it's 2029.
Is that 2029?
I'm not sure. I think.
Well, we're certainly on the last couple of instances where this is going to be the case, that it's on basic. But I agree with you. There's something incredibly bittersweet about it, and also hugely preoccupying, right? In terms of what it's going to look like. I do think that there are some overarching trends, and I wonder if we're going to be able to see that next year, or maybe guess that into next year. Some filmmakers who maybe are going to deliver very important work, very urgent work that does not shy away from saying something. And whether that's something to look for, whether we're going to maybe go back a little bit and maybe start rewarding some newer voices. I remember when the Daniels won for Everything Everywhere. It's been a while since that. We've been rewarding filmmakers with longer trajectories. Well, it'll be interesting to see if that holds up. Yeah. I do like. I don't know if you would agree, but I do like that it feels like we're entering into this moment of filmmaking, not unlike, a moment that we grew up in, which was, what do they call it? The aughts, was it the aughts? No, or the 2000s, when we had films like, No Country for Old Men and Departed winning Oscars and having a huge chunk of the conversation, and the darker history gets, the films tend to imitate that. And I wonder how we'll see that surface this year. Yeah. Right?
100%. I 100% agree.
But we may be heading into that territory. Do you agree? Where we're not going to be getting too many optimistic Best Picture winners.
But even just over the last few years, it's hard to see the Academy that gave very deserved Oscars to, one battle. And I certainly think Anora, and Oppenheimer was a big movie for several people, kind of stand alongside giving an Oscar to Green Book, which was like 2018.
Right.
So even though 2018 wasn't that long ago, it feels like we're in new territory.
Yeah. It feels
like it doesn't feel like Green Book could win.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, unless we're going to come up to this moment, and again, maybe in a year I'm swallowing my words, it doesn't feel like what the Academy at large wants to embrace right now is blind optimism. Yeah. I think we really want to scrutinize,
Well, there was Coda also.
Which again is, I would argue that is going on during a more optimistic moment. Yeah. Right? Yeah. A moment where there's a little bit more hope as to where we can get to, as a lot of fear as to where we are at. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see. This is always a conversation, right? It'll be interesting to see how that shows up this year. Yeah. And also what new voices are going to stand out, what voices from the past are going to reemerge, what voices are finally going to get their due. A lot of things to look forward to. Very unprecedented times, very scary times. And the art and the cinema will reflect that.
Yes.
Right?
As it always does.
Yeah. And so this is our final episode for this season 2 of Academy Anonymous. We want to thank all of you listeners for sticking with us. We've enjoyed covering the race. We've enjoyed exploring everything that has happened up to this moment. We've enjoyed analyzing it, trying to decipher what it means, what it could lead to, predicting what outcomes are. I will say, I think it's important to say, how did we end up doing? I think for our overall total, less than what we wanted.
Unfortunately, we got 5 wrong.
Right.
And that's we said this in the episode when we predicted the nominees. It's always more fun to predict the nominations because honestly, I'll give you 100%. If you just copied Gold Derby, you would have gotten 3 wrong.
Yeah.
You would have gotten 3 freaking wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And we took a chance in some categories like visual effects, which bit us in the butt.
We did.
But that's why it's a little less fun.
Yeah.
Everything is more crystallized. It's more cemented. The real fun is can you guess the 5 nominees in each category?
I would argue that's the real challenge too.
Yeah.
I mean guessing 23 winners
separates the men from the boys.
Yeah. You want to be an adult in the room, then you have to be able to predict the range of nominees throughout, and that's, as you said, more fun. So we did end up getting a little bit lower than we wanted. Kind of happy with some calls that we did make, stuck to our guns with the singers, switched to the girl who cried pearls at the end. We matched certain people. We had a lot of people like us that had the reversal of casting and cinematography and the swap. And so, it's been a great season. We want to thank you all for joining us. We're signing off for this season.
Look for us around Cannes. We'll be going to Cannes. I think right now we're thinking about how we're going to be sharing with you guys our experiences at Cannes. Maybe we'll be more active on Twitter. You might see us. You might hear from us there.
Yeah.
Or maybe we'll do a quick episode before we leave for our trip.
That'd be nice.
Just spitballing like titles that we think could be on it. But we'll definitely be on the ground at Cannes, seeing what this year has to offer. Cannes has, whatever shows up at Cannes, you can expect people to be talking about it for the next 12 months.
Right.
So it's always fun.
It'll be the engine,
It's always fun to be there. Looking forward to it and to sharing with you guys our experiences.
Yeah. So
look for us around that time.
We'll be taking a brief hiatus from the podcast. We will still be catching up with everyone on social media at Academy Anon is our Twitter handle, and we'll try to keep the website a little bit more up to date and drop any news there if we can. Maybe we will do a little bit of a projection for Cannes. We'll discuss ways to get you guys involved into the things we see. Then, of course, there's a lot to cover already. As we speak, Project Hail Mary has come out. It's done well. There's been some talk there.
Yeah.
South by Southwest, Sundance. These are all things that we are going to cover in season 3 of the Academy Anonymous podcast. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to sharing our thoughts with everyone next season in just a little bit of time.
Thank you so much for sticking with us, hearing us out, going on this journey with us. We appreciate all of you, all of our listeners. And till next time,
I'm Joseph.
And I'm Jules. And it's been a pleasure.
If you've been enjoying the Academy Anonymous podcast and want to support the work we're doing, there's a voluntary support link in the show notes. Totally optional. Just a way to help us keep the podcast going. Thank you for listening.
The music on this episode, entitled Cool Cats, was graciously provided by Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0.
Disclaimer. The Academy Anonymous podcast is in no way affiliated or endorsed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.